The first thing Commander Kellen Voss noticed wasn't the sterile white walls of the cryo chamber, or the gentle hum of life support systems coming online. It was the silence. After 30 years of war, silence was wrong. His neural implants sparked to life as consciousness flooded back, downloading status reports that made his blood freeze. The timestamps were impossible. The dates couldn't be real. 512 years. Earth's defensive grid, offline for centuries. Colonial fleet status, unknown. Human population centers, no active signals detected. Voss jackknifed. Upright, his enhanced muscles screaming in protest. The automated medical bay of the deep space frigate Retribution continued its diagnostic chatter, but he ignored it. His fingers found the tactical display with muscle memory, calling up sensor sweeps of the surrounding space. What he saw made him want to crawl back into cryo-sleep forever. Earth hung in the view screen like a diseased pearl, its surface a patchwork of alien terraforming projects. Massive biomechanical structures sprawled across what had once been North America, their tendrils reaching into the atmosphere like hungry roots. The moon bore similar scars, its surface honeycombed with mining operations that pulsed with bioluminescent light. But worse than the conquest was the prosperity. The orbital infrastructure wasn't military, it was civilian. Trade stations, shipping lanes, tourist platforms. The hegemony hadn't just defeated humanity. They'd turned Earth into a vacation destination. Voss's hand moved to his weapon automatically, finding the plasma pistol still mag-locked to his thigh. The weight was comforting, familiar. Everything else was a nightmare. The ship's AI materialized as a blue hologram, its form carefully neutral to avoid triggering post-traumatic responses in awakened soldiers. Commander Voss, your biometrics indicate severe psychological distress. Shall I administer? Status report. His voice came out as a growl. Everything, now. The Retribution has been in powered down mode for 487 years, maintaining minimal life support for your cryo chamber. We are currently in a stable orbit around Jupiter's fourth moon. Tachyon base designation Whisper 7. Long-range sensors indicate. The AI's voice faded to background noise as Voss processed the tactical situation. His ship was a relic, its weapons systems outdated, its crew of 12,000 reduced to 1. The war he fought, the war that had cost him everything, was ancient history. Humanity had not only lost, they'd been forgotten. But as he studied the sensor data, something else became clear. The hegemony's forces were spread thin across 1,000 conquered worlds, their military focused on expansion rather than defense. Their ships were sleek and efficient, designed for commerce and colonization. They'd grown soft. They'd forgotten what humans were capable of when they had nothing left to lose. Voss pulled up the ship's armory manifest. The Retribution had been humanity's most advanced warship, packed with experimental weapons and enough firepower to level continents. Most importantly, it carried something the hegemony had never encountered: quantum recursive munitions, weapons that could punch through their bioshields and turn their own adaptive defenses. Against them, AI, run full diagnostics on all weapons systems. I want everything operational in 6 hours. Commander, if I may ask, what are your intentions? Voss stared at the image of Earth, at the alien cities sprawling across the graves of his friends, his family, his entire species. The hegemony had won the war, but they'd made one crucial mistake. They left him alive. We're going to finish what we started, he said, and began plotting humanity's revenge. The hegemony patrol ship Symbiotic Harmony was conducting a routine inspection of the outer system when its biosensors detected the energy signature. Captain Velter Cathes, a four-armed cephalopod whose species had joined the hegemony 60 years after Earth's fall, extended his neural tendrils into the ship's living computer matrix. Curious, he mused, his thoughts rippling through the ship's consciousness. The energy pattern is primitive, pre-integration technology. His crew of 12 assorted aliens barely looked up from their stations. Border patrol was monumentally boring, especially in this backwater system. Earth had been pacified so long ago that most species considered it a historical footnote. That was their first mistake. The second was assuming the derelict ship drifting near Jupiter's moons was actually derelict. Retribution hung in space like a sleeping predator, its hull scarred by ancient battles, its weapon port sealed by what appeared to be centuries of neglect. Its energy signature was minimal, consistent with a dead ship running on emergency power. Velter's sensors detected a single life sign, probably a survivor in failing cryosleep. Standard salvage protocol. He ordered his ship's bioweapons, retracting in a gesture of casual dismissal, board the derelict, secure any valuable technology, and file a report. The boarding shuttle detached from symbiotic harmony like a parasitic organism, its surface shifting and flowing as it approached. The ancient human warship. Inside, 6 hegemony soldiers prepared for what they assumed would be a routine extraction. They were wrong. The moment the shuttle clamped onto Retribution's hull, Voss triggered the trap. The airlock didn't just open, it erupted. The docking clamps that had seemed corroded and weak were actually mag-charged launchers, firing shaped projectiles that tore through the shuttle's bioarmor like tissue paper. The first alien through the breach was a Keth Mori warrior, its chitinous shell gleaming with symbiotic weapons. It died before it could register the humans standing in the corridor, plasma bolt punching through its thorax and cooking its organs from the inside. The second alien managed to raise its weapon, a living creature that fired acidic spines before. Voss's second shot vaporized its head. Contact. The third alien screamed into its communicator. The derelict is Voss's knife. Thrown with enhanced precision, opened its throat. The creature gurgled and fell, its bioweapon turning on its own corpse in confusion. The remaining 3 soldiers tried to retreat, but the airlock had sealed behind them. They were trapped in a corridor with something they'd never encountered before. A human soldier with nothing to lose. At 5 centuries of rage, the fight lasted 12 seconds. When it was over, Voss was splattered with alien blood and the corridor was littered with bodies. He activated the Retribution's tractor beam and began reeling in the patrol ship. On the bridge of symbiotic harmony, Velter felt his crew's terror through the bioneural link. Impossible, he whispered. Humans were extinct. They were all extinct. The answer came in the form of a transmission from the ancient warship. The face that appeared on the main screen was lean and scarred, with eyes that held the cold fire of absolute purpose. "This is Commander Kellen Voss of the Terran Defense Force," the human said, his voice carrying across 5 centuries of death. "You killed my world. You enslaved my species. You thought you'd won." Velter's tentacles writhed in growing panic. You're dead. Your people are dead. The war is over." "No," Voss replied, and his smile was a predator's grin. "The war is just beginning again." The transmission cut off, and symbiotic harmony began to scream literally. The ship's living hull was in agony as unknown weapons tore through its bioshields. Quantum recursive missiles, weapons that had been humanity's last desperate innovation, punched through dimensions and struck the ship's consciousness directly. The patrol ship died screaming, its biocomponents writhing in terminal agony as their cellular structure collapsed from within. In the silence that followed, Voss began downloading everything from its memory banks, patrol routes, fleet positions, the locations of every hegemony installation in the system. The hunt was beginning. The destruction of symbiotic harmony sent ripples of panic through the hegemony's command structure. Within hours, every military installation in the Sol system had received the same impossible message. A human survivor was loose in the outer system, and he was killing everything that moved. Admiral Zorik Mindrender, Supreme Commander of the Sol Defense Collective, found himself facing a crisis that shouldn't exist. In his species' 1,000-year history, the hegemony had never encountered a resurgent enemy. Once a world fell, it stayed fallen. The conquered species were integrated, their aggression channeled into productive roles within the collective. Humans had been different from the beginning. "Show me the tactical analysis again," he commanded, his serpentine body coiled around the command throne. The holographic display materialized, showing the Retribution's projected capabilities based on the wreckage of the patrol ship. His aide, a nervous Catherian with translucent skin, extended neural tendrils into the data stream. "The weapons technology is 5 centuries old, but it's adaptable. The quantum recursive warheads ignore our bioshields entirely. They attack the target's dimensional matrix directly, and the ship itself, pre-integration design. No living components, no bioneural networks we can subvert. It's like fighting a ghost. We can't predict its behavior because it doesn't think like us." Mindrender's scales rippled with frustrated anger. The hegemony's entire military doctrine was based on biointegration, on ships and weapons that could adapt, evolve, and coordinate through shared consciousness. They fought like a living organism, fluid and intuitive. This human fought like a machine, cold, calculating, and utterly without mercy. Deploy the 3rd and 7th fleets, Mindrender ordered. I want that primitive cornered and destroyed before the tactical display erupted in red warnings. Another ship had gone dark, the heavy cruiser Emergent thought, on patrol near Saturn. The final transmission was brief and terrifying, screaming, explosions, and a human voice coldly requesting the ship surrender before the signal cut to static. He's not running, Mindrender realized with growing horror. He's hunting us. 3 days later, the scope of the nightmare became clear. The human wasn't randomly attacking. He was systematically dismantling the entire Sol System defense network. Supply convoys vanished without a trace. Patrol ships found themselves facing impossible odds as the retribution materialized from nowhere, unleashed devastating firepower, and vanished before reinforcements could arrive. Worse, the ship seemed to be getting stronger. Analysis of the wreckage suggested the human was salvaging technology, integrating hegemony systems into his ancient vessel. The quantum recursive weapons were becoming more sophisticated, more precise. The ship's stealth capabilities were improving with each engagement. But the most terrifying discovery came when they analyzed the tactical patterns. The human wasn't just destroying ships, he was learning. Each attack was more efficient than the last, exploiting weaknesses in hegemony doctrine that their own commanders had never recognized. He's fought us before, Mindrender told his staff during an emergency briefing. 500 years ago, he learned our weaknesses. Now he's applying that knowledge with 5 centuries of hindsight. The room fell silent. The concept was incomprehensible to species that had never known defeat. Sir, the Catherian aide spoke hesitantly. The Earth Defense Council is demanding action. The tourism industry is beginning to panic. If word spreads that a human survivor is, the tourist industry can burn in stellar fire. Mindrender snarled. We're not dealing with a terrorist or a pirate. We're dealing with a one-man extinction event. On his tactical display, another red warning appeared. The orbital processing station around Europa had gone silent. The pattern continued, a brief burst of human transmission, offering surrender terms that were clearly sarcastic, followed by overwhelming violence and then silence. But this time, there was something different. The retribution hadn't vanished. Immediately after the attack, long-range sensors showed it holding position near Europa's surface, almost as if it were waiting. It's a trap, Mindrender said immediately. He wants us to respond in force. Then what do we do? The Admiral stared at the display, his tactical mind racing through possibilities. The human had destroyed 12 ships and 3 installations, and for days. His own forces were becoming demoralized, jumping at shadows and firing at anything that didn't immediately identify itself as friendly. We give him what he wants, Mindrender decided. Full deployment. Every ship, every weapon, every advantage we have. We end this now, before it spreads beyond Sol System. He didn't yet understand that this was exactly what Commander Kellen Voss had been counting on. The battle for Europa began at 03 for 7 hours when Admiral Mindrender's combined fleet dropped out of hyperspace in perfect formation, 47 ships of the line, from nimble biofighters to massive dreadnoughts whose living hulls pulsed with barely contained power. It was the largest military deployment in Sol System since the original conquest 5 centuries ago. They found the retribution exactly where the sensors had indicated, hanging motionless above Europa, as frozen surface, its weapon ports dark, its engines cold. To the hegemony commanders, it looked like a cornered animal playing dead. They were catastrophically wrong. All ships, standard encirclement pattern. Mindrender commanded through the binaural link. I want overlapping fields of fire. When that primitive moves, I want it vaporized. The fleet moved with organic precision, their living ships communicating through biochemical signals that rippled through space, like invisible pheromones. Within minutes, they had the retribution surrounded, trapped in a sphere of destruction that no ship could escape. This is Admiral Zorik Mindrender of the Sol Defense Collective. He broadcast on all frequencies. Human vessel, you are completely surrounded. Surrender immediately or be destroyed. The response came immediately, and it was laughter. Not manic or desperate laughter, but the cold, calculated amusement of a predator that had just walked into the perfect trap. Admiral, Commander Voss's voice carried across the void. You just made the same mistake your predecessors made 500 years ago. You assumed I was running away from something instead of running toward it. The tactical display exploded into chaos as Europa's surface erupted. What the hegemony had taken for natural ice formations were actually camouflaged weapons emplacements, hundreds of them, built from salvaged ship components and powered by jury-rigged reactors. The moon had been turned into a fortress, but that wasn't the worst surprise. The Retribution wasn't the only human ship in the system. 3 more vessels materialized from the electromagnetic shadow of Jupiter's radiation belt, ancient destroyers that Voss had found drifting in the outer system, their crews long dead, but their weapons still functional. He'd spent the past week bringing them online, slaving their systems to his command. All ships, emergency scatter, Mindrender screamed, but it was too late. The trap was already closing. The first salvo from Europa's surface batteries caught the biocruiser symbiotic grace amidships, quantum recursive warheads punching through its adaptive shields and detonating inside its living hull. The ship's death scream echoed across the fleet's bioneural network, a psychic shriek of agony that left every crew member reeling. The Retribution came alive like a vengeful ghost, its engines flaring to brilliant life as it accelerated straight into the heart of the hegemony formation. Ancient human weapons, designed for maximum brutality rather than efficiency, tore through bioarmor that had been evolved to resist energy weapons, but not kinetic penetrators loaded with antimatter charges. Break formation, all ships, independent action, Mindrender ordered. But the fleet's organic coordination was working against them. Ships that had been designed to fight, as a unified organism, found themselves hampered by their own integration. When one vessel screamed in pain, the others felt it. When one died, the psychic backlash rippled through the entire formation. The destroyer Vengeance materialized behind the dreadnought Eternal Communion, its plasma cannons raking the larger ship's engine pods. Bioreactive armor tried to adapt to the energy signatures, but the human weapons were crude and unpredictable, switching frequencies and power levels in patterns that defied analysis. Eternal Communion rolled desperately, trying to bring its main weapons to bear, but the destroyer was already gone, vanishing into the electromagnetic chaos of Europa's artificial aurora. The human ships fought like demons, appearing and disappearing at will, striking where the enemy was weakest and vanishing before retaliation could arrive. But the hegemony had 47 ships, and the humans had 4. Mathematics would eventually triumph over tactics. The end came when the biofighter wing managed to bracket the destroyer Retribution's edge. The ancient ship's point defense systems were overwhelmed by sheer numbers, and living missiles punched through its hull like parasites. The ship's death was spectacular as the antimatter core breached, creating a miniature star that incinerated everything within 1,000 kilometers. In the aftermath, as the radiation cleared, Admiral Mindrender found himself staring at a tactical display that showed 18 of his ships destroyed or crippled, with the 3 remaining human vessels retreating toward the outer system. "Pursue them," he ordered, his voice hollow with shock. "All ships, pursue course. We finished this now." But his aide was staring at the sensor readings from Europa's surface. "Sir, the weapons emplacements are still active, and they're building more on Europa's surface." Automated systems that Voss had cobbled together from salvaged components continued their work, turning the moon's ice into weapons, its minerals into ammunition. The human commander had done more than set a trap. He created a factory for war, and somewhere in the outer system, the Retribution was broadcasting on all frequencies, sending a message that would change everything. "This is Commander Kellen. Voss to all human survivors, wherever you are, the war isn't over. It's time to come home." The response to Voss's broadcast came from the most unexpected places. Deep space mining platforms where humans had been kept as technical specialists. Agricultural worlds where human consultants tended biofarms. Even from Earth itself, where a few thousand humans still lived in carefully controlled preserves. Like living museums of a conquered species. They came in stolen ships, in modified cargo haulers, in anything that could carry weapons and a crew, with nothing left to lose. By the time Admiral Mindrender realized what was happening, there were over 200 human vessels converging on the Sol system, turning the outer asteroid belt into humanity's final staging ground. But the hegemony's response was overwhelming. Fleet Admiral Kester Worldburner arrived with the 3rd Imperial Battle Group, 300 ships of the line, including the massive Biotitan consuming Infinity, a living dreadnought the size of a small moon whose very presence in the system disrupted local space-time. The battle began in the asteroid belt, where human engineers had spent weeks turning floating rocks into gun platforms. What followed was the largest space battle in galactic history, a three-dimensional war that raged across millions of cubic kilometers of space. The Retribution led humanity's assault, its ancient hull scarred by countless modifications as Voss pushed his ship beyond all design parameters. Quantum recursive missiles streaked through space like angry stars, each one capable of punching through reality itself to strike at the target's core structure. All human ships, Pattern Omega, Voss commanded over the tactical net. We break their center, or we don't go home. Pattern Omega was humanity's last desperate innovation from the original war, a formation designed to sacrifice everything for maximum damage. Ships would ram biovessels at near-light speed, their crews dying in explosions that could crack planets. It was insane, suicidal, and utterly human. The biocruiser Adaptive Harmony was the first to die, as the converted mining ship Terra's fist slammed into its living hull. At a significant fraction of light speed, the explosion vaporized both vessels and sent shockwaves rippling through the hegemony formation. But for every human ship that died, it took 2 or 3 hegemony vessels with it. The bioship's adaptive defenses, so effective against conventional weapons, were useless against kinetic strikes from vessels with nothing to lose. Impossible, Fleet Admiral Kester whispered, his tentacles writhing in disbelief. They're fighting to extinction. Why aren't they retreating? The answer came from Commander Voss himself, his transmission cutting through the battle's chaos. Because you already killed us all once. This time, we're taking you with us. The human cargo hauler Freedom's Price broke through the hegemony's fighter screen, its hull bristling with improvised weapons. Its target was the bio-titan consuming Infinity, and its crew of 12 knew they were flying into certain death. The Titan's living weapons reached out like grasping tentacles, tearing the small ship apart piece by piece. But the humans had expected this. As Freedom's Price died, its crew triggered the ship's entire cargo hold, 1,000 tons of antimatter. In improvised containment fields, the explosion was visible from Jupiter. When the light faded, consuming Infinity was gone, along with 16 escort ships that had been caught in the blast radius. All ships, full retreat, Kester screamed. But it was too late. The humans had close to knife fighting range, and their ramming attacks were devastating the fleet's cohesion. The bio-battleship Emergent Dominion found itself engaged in a brutal close-quarters duel with 3 human destroyers, living weapons, lashed out, trying to board and consume the enemy vessels. But the humans had prepared for this too. Their ships were filled with toxins specifically designed to kill hegemony bioforms, turning boarding actions into mutual suicide. Emergent Dominion's death was agonizing, as human toxins flooded its living corridors and turned its own biology against it. The ship's consciousness screamed across the bioneural network, a psychic shriek that left half the hegemony fleet reeling in sympathetic agony. But the humans were dying too. For every hegemony ship destroyed, humanity lost 3 or 4 vessels. The mathematics of extinction were inexorable. There simply weren't enough humans left to sustain these casualties. The Retribution had taken terrible damage. Its hull breached in dozens of places, its crew compartments opened to space. But Voss kept fighting, his enhanced biology allowing him to survive in conditions that would kill an unmodified human. He was the last human crew member alive on his ship, manually targeting weapons and flying attack patterns that should have been impossible for a single pilot. Commander, the voice belonged to Captain Elena Vasquez, commanding the destroyer Humanity's Daughter. We're down to 47 ships. We can't sustain this much longer. Voss looked at his tactical display, seeing the truth she wouldn't voice. They were winning. The hegemony fleet was in full retreat, leaving nearly 200 ships dead in the asteroid belt. But humanity had paid the price. Of the original 200, a third of 4 human vessels, fewer than 50 remained combat capable. All ships, Voss commanded, his voice carrying the weight of species extinction. Withdraw to Europa. We've given them something to remember us by. As the surviving human ships limped back toward Europa's fortified surface, Admiral Mindrender's remaining forces regrouped near Mars. The hegemony had won the tactical victory. They still controlled the system, but they paid a price in ships and lives that would be remembered for centuries. And in the wreckage of the asteroid belt, automated human weapons platforms continued their silent work, turning debris into ammunition for the next battle. The siege of Europa lasted 4 to 7 days. Admiral Mindrender, reinforced by every available ship in the sector, had surrounded the moon with a blockade that nothing could penetrate. The 43 surviving human vessels, sat on Europa's surface like wounded animals, their crews working frantically to repair battle damage with salvaged materials. But Commander Voss wasn't preparing for a last stand. He was preparing for an apotheosis. "Sir," Captain Vasquez reported from the command bunker deep beneath Europa's ice. "The bioscanners are detecting massive fleet movements. They're bringing in everything I'm reading, over 800 ships." Voss didn't look up from the tactical display where he was plotting their final move. "Good. I want them all here when we finish this." "Finish what, sir? We're outnumbered 20 to 1, even with the surface defenses. We can't possibly. We're not trying to win, Elena." Voss's voice carried the finality of absolute decision. "We're trying to send a message that will echo across the galaxy for the next 1,000 years. The truth was hidden in Europa's depths, in chambers that human engineers had carved from the moon's core. For weeks, they'd been mining not ice, but the moon's metallic heart, extracting materials for a weapon that defied every law of civilized warfare. It was a planet killer, not the clean, surgical weapons that advanced species used for stellar engineering, but a crude, brutal device that would crack Europa like an egg and send the fragments spinning outward. At near relativistic speeds, the debris field would make the inner soul system uninhabitable for centuries. "You're insane," Dr. Miranda Chen whispered when she realized what Voss was planning. She was one of the human specialists who'd escaped from a bioresearch facility on Titan, and her knowledge of hegemony physiology had been invaluable in designing the toxins that had killed so many bioships. "If you detonate that weapon, it'll sterilize half the solar system, Earth included." "Earth is already dead," Voss replied coldly. "Has been for 500 years. What's left down there isn't our world, it's their trophy." The final assault began at dawn, though dawn on Europa was a relative concept. The hegemony fleet descended like a living storm, bioships pulsing with bioluminescent weapons as they prepared to crack the moon's defenses once and for all. Admiral Mindrender had learned from his previous defeats. This time, there would be no clever tactics, no opportunity for human unpredictability to turn the tide. He would simply overwhelm the defenders with sheer mass, using his ship's superior numbers to absorb casualties while grinding the humans into extinction. The surface batteries opened fire first, sending streams of quantum recursive missiles into the descending fleet. Bioships died in brilliant flashes of collapsing reality, their living hulls unable to adapt to weapons that attacked the fundamental structure of space-time itself. But there were too many. For every ship that died, 2 more took its place. The hegemony fleet was like a tide of living metal, unstoppable and inexorable. The human ships rose from Europa's surface like vengeful spirits, their crews knowing this would be their final flight. The Retribution led the charge, its scarred hull glowing with the heat of overcharged weapons. Behind it came the destroyers Humanity's Daughter, Terra's Wrath, and Final Answer, their crews singing the old battle hymns. As they accelerated toward certain death, the space around Europa became a nightmare of intersecting fire. Human ships darted between the massive biovessels like fighters attacking bombers, their quantum weapons carving through living armor, while biomissiles sought them out like hungry predators. The destroyer Final Answer died first, overwhelmed by a swarm of biofighters that tore it apart piece by piece. Its crew of 37 died at their posts, still firing as their ship disintegrated around them. Terra's Wrath lasted longer, its pilot a former mining engineer named Jake Morrison somehow keeping his ship alive through a dozen impossible maneuvers. He managed to ram the biocruiser Adaptive Serenity before his ship finally succumbed to accumulate damage, but the Retribution seemed indestructible. Voss flew his ancient warship through the heart of the enemy formation, its weapons cutting through bioships like a chainsaw through flesh. His ship was held together by welds and prayers, its hull breached in so many places that he was essentially flying in a vacuum, but still he fought on all remaining ships. He broadcast on the final frequency, "Initiate Protocol 7. It's been an honor." Protocol 7 was humanity's last gift to the galaxy. Every surviving human ship turned toward Europa's surface and began a controlled descent, not to land, but to crash. Their impact would trigger the planet killer buried in the moon's core. Stop them. Mindrender screamed, but it was too late. The human ships were already committed to their final dive, and nothing in the hegemony arsenal could stop them. All died as the Retribution fell toward Europa's surface. Voss looked one last time at the image of Earth on his view screen. Somewhere down there, in those alien cities built on human graves, tourists were probably watching the light show in the sky, without understanding what it meant. "This is for Sarah," he whispered, thinking of the woman who died in his arms during the siege of Luna 5 centuries ago. "This is for all of them." The retribution struck Europa's surface at 20,000 meters per second, its impact triggering a chain reaction that had been 500 years in the making. Europa died in a flash of nuclear fire that briefly outshone the sun. The destruction of Europa sent shockwaves through the hegemony that went far beyond the physical devastation. The debris field from the shattered moon had indeed sterilized the inner Sol system, making Earth uninhabitable for the first time in millennia. But more than that, the humans' final act had shattered something fundamental in the hegemony's understanding of warfare. They had never encountered a species willing to destroy itself simply to inflict maximum damage on its enemies. Admiral Mindrender stood in the observation deck of his flagship, staring at the expanding cloud of radioactive debris that had once been Europa. His fleet had survived most of it, anyway, but the victory felt hollow. 800 ships to destroy 43 human vessels. The mathematics were absurd, sir. His aide reported. "We're receiving priority transmissions from the High Council. They're demanding explanations." Mindrender's scales rippled with bitter amusement. Explanations? How could he explain that humanity's final stand had been broadcast across the galaxy? That a dozen species were already asking uncomfortable questions about the hegemony's methods of conquest. The footage was everywhere. Commander Kellenvoss, the last human in the Sol system, choosing to die rather than submit, the image of the retribution diving toward Europa's surface, its pilot's final words echoing across subspace, "Remember us." But the real damage wasn't psychological. It was practical. The Keth Mori Confederacy, longtime allies of the hegemony, had quietly withdrawn their support. The Valdrian Republic was asking pointed questions about acceptable losses in future conflicts. 3 minor species had petitioned the Galactic Council for protected status, citing human precedent as justification. For the first time in its 1,000-year history, the hegemony was being questioned. "The High Council is recalling us to the capital," the aide continued. "They want a full investigation into the Sol system incident." Mindrender tasted the word like poison. Is that what we're calling it? But even as the political ramifications spread, something else was happening in the outer reaches of the galaxy, in systems so remote that the hegemony had never bothered to conquer them. Long-range telescopes had recorded the final moments of the battle. The images were crude, distorted by distance and interference, but they were enough. They showed humans fighting to the death against impossible odds. They showed ships ramming biovessels at suicidal speeds. They showed a species that refused to surrender even when extinction was certain. On the frontier world of Kepler for Fortuby, a young Altarian engineer named Zev Korvik watched the recordings. For the 7th time, his species had been conquered by the hegemony 3 generations ago. Integrated into their biocollective as technical specialists, they had accepted their fate, as conquered species always did, but the humans hadn't accepted anything. They chose to die free rather than live as slaves. Korvik whispered to his cell of resistance fighters, "If they could do it, so can we." The revolution that began on Kepler for 4 to be spread like wildfire, the hegemony's bioneural networks, so efficient at coordinating their forces, became vectors for the very idea they tried to suppress. That some things were worth dying for, on Earth, in the carefully maintained human preserves. Word of Commander Voss's final stand spread in whispers. The few thousand humans still alive on their homeworld had been told that they were the last of their species, that resistance was futile. They'd been lied to. An elderly woman named Grace Patterson, who remembered stories her grandmother had told about the original war, stood in the ruins of what had once been New York City. Around her, alien tourists took pictures of the quaint primitive architecture, but she was looking up at the sky where Europa's debris still glowed like a second sunrise. "The war isn't over," she said to the small group of humans who gathered in secret. "It's just beginning." Within a year, the first human resistance cells had formed on Earth itself. Within 5 years, they'd made contact with surviving human populations on a dozen worlds. Within a decade, the free human fleet had assembled at the edge of the galaxy, carrying weapons and tactics learned from Commander Voss's final transmission. The hegemony had won the battle for Sol system. They destroyed the last human military force and pacified Earth once and for all. On paper, humanity was extinct as a threat, but they'd made one crucial error. They'd given humanity martyrs, as they would learn, were far more dangerous than mere soldiers in the depths of space. Automated beacons continued to broadcast Commander Kellen Voss's final message. The signal was weak, distorted by centuries of drift, but it carried across the galaxy like a ghost frequency that no amount of hegemony jamming could silence. This is humanity's declaration of war. We are the species that chose extinction over slavery. We are the people who turned our own moon into a weapon rather than accept defeat. Remember us, not as victims, but as the proof that some things are worth any price. We are coming back. The hegemony had thought they were fighting a war of conquest. They discovered, too late, that they'd been fighting a war of ideas, and ideas, once released, could never be destroyed. Commander Kellen Voss had woken up 500 years after Earth fell, and he'd started the war all over again. But this time, it wasn't just humanity's war, it was the galaxy's war for freedom. And somewhere in the expanding debris field of Europa, scattered among the radioactive fragments of a shattered moon, were the microscopic remains of quantum recursive technology that would take the hegemony's scientists decades to understand and centuries to counter. The dead had left their successors one final gift, the weapons to finish what they'd started. The war that Commander Voss had restarted would rage for 300 years, consuming empires and reshaping the galaxy. When it finally ended, the hegemony would be nothing but a footnote in history, and the words "Remember Europa" would be carved into monuments on 1,000 liberated worlds. But that's another story. This one ends with a single human, alone in the vastness of space, choosing to light a candle rather than curse the darkness. And that candle became a beacon that guided an entire galaxy home to freedom. The universe would never be the same.